Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode of TNCBA's Tips, Tricks, and How-Tos. Kelsey, we just rolled over into October. It's a lot colder than what it's been the last few years. I feel like this early in the year.
It excites me a little bit.
It does me too, and I feel like the water temperatures I've seen the last couple of weeks when we've been out on the water on Douglas and stuff, they're dropping pretty quick. So I feel like we're going to get into this fall transition or get into the fall feed a little bit faster than we have the last few
Oh
years.
yeah,
Because it just felt like the past couple of years, it seems like those 70s and 80s just kept lingering in
go
those
into
warm nights.
November.
Yeah. So, I
Yeah,
mean, it's like it just never gets there. So, what we want to talk to y'all about today, guys, is the fall transition and really how we're going to approach the fall transition on these lakes in our area because our lakes are different than a lot of regions with the whole drawdown situation. That water's falling, the baits moving. But what I want to talk about is kind of the different locations first of all. So as we're looking at a lake, the lakes, and we'll use Douglas as our reference point right now because I've been on Douglas and stuff, and Douglas is a lake we've got coming up in the 1st of November for our club deals and stuff. But when you look at Douglas, and I'll pull up the screenshot here really quick of that. When you look at Douglas, you've got the upper end, the middle, and the lower end to talk about. And what you need to keep in mind is that upper end is a lot shallower. You have a lot more mud flats and stuff. You're going to get a little bit deeper there in the middle section. And then the deepest average water that you're going to have is going to be down there towards the dam. That lower end, which I really consider Muddy Creek down to the dam. For me, the middle section's really kind of like that Dandridge area to about Taylor's Bend. And then from there up, you're talking river.
yeah.
But what happens is with that shallower water there in the upper end, it's going to cool off a lot quicker. So when I was down on Douglas 2 weeks ago, water was in that mid 70s range there in that middle section. I would expect it to, at that point, have already been down in the low 70s, maybe even clipping 60. Now, with these few cold nights that we've had, I'm sure it's getting down there into the low six or in the mid 60s at least. So the upper end's going to cool off a lot quicker. Now, that can be good and bad for a situation. If that's your type of preference, if you like that river fish and if you like getting super shallow, that's your place to be. For me, I struggle a little bit to go up there in those mud flats and have the confidence and stuff. But
I'm the same way. I'm a steep and deep guy anyway. So I mean,
so you like a little more depth around you a little bit. But those areas play so much earlier in the fall transition just because they're cooling off faster. So that bait fish is going to move into those smaller pockets, those shallow pockets early. You're going to see birds back there feeding. And those are key things to pay attention to. Look for fish that are breaking. Look for fish that are, they're up there. They might be schooling, but you might just see them pushing shad around. So on this lake, as we said here, looking at Douglas, you can see that we have extremely shallow water. And Navionics, the web app, the other charts have online versions as well, but they're great to go take a look at. But if you zoom in up here in the upper portion of the river, you can see with these blues that we're already dealing with some super shallow areas. And this is here around that Walters Bridge 25E area. But you've got some really good cuts and some really good flats for these bait fish to move back into.
Yeah.
And that's really, really key because with those flats and with those areas, you're going to have some stick ups, you're going to have some laydowns, and they're going to hold to something. You might find some of your bigger fish around some of those isolated laydowns, stumps, whatever it may be. There might even be a rock pile out there in some of these mud flats. But again, you're looking for those areas predominantly. You're looking at them because that's where the bait's moving. That's where the bass is going to be following them in that migration. So in the early fall transition throughout October here, I'm going to be looking in those little cuts in those mud flats. And like I said, you can see some here right near Walters Bridge. You can go on up and you see them again where you've got these cuts going back into these big mud flats. Now, as you go back down the lake, we'll zoom out here a little bit. You start to lose as many of those mud flats. You start getting some steeper banks, some deeper banks right there, deeper water right next to the bank. So because of that, I'm going to change up my approach a little bit as where up there in the river, I'm going to be probably throwing a top water. I'm going to be throwing a chatterbait, something that runs shallow, a lipless crankbait. I'm going to be covering a lot of water in those flats and in those mud flats. But as I come back down, I might have to switch up some baits that are going to run a little bit deeper. Kelsey, what are some things that you like to throw early in the fall that are just confidence based? Because I feel like we talked about that a little bit before this. You've got to go to your confidence deals here at this time because fish are all over the map.
And really, baits I'm going to stick to is you were talking deeper, a little bit deeper. I'm going to be throwing like a Strike King Series 5.
Okay.
Not a 5XD, but a Series
Yeah.
5. You know, it's not going to get as deep, but it's got a little bit different wobble. The
Yeah.
bills are just a little bit different. Series 3s, deep Norman, deep little ends, things
Yeah.
like that. Shad Raps.
So keep working just a
Square
little.
bills.
Square
Square
bills
bills
are
are
a big
another one
one.
that'll be a big factor, and that's getting you a little bit deeper, but still shallow.
Still working that shallow area, and we talked about wood cover being a big key this time of year, and it's going to deflect well.
Holding tight to rock, things like that. Because I mean, these fish when they feed, they need a hard surface.
Yeah, they're going to press it up against something. They want to trap that bait. So as we move back down the lake, as we said, you're going to be looking here at some steeper banks as we're moving down. We get into this midsection. You can still find these areas where it's going to shallow up. Think about the back of swans and stuff like that. You're going to find some flats in the backs of these creeks. So I may run to those areas or find the nearest drop from those flats in the backs of these creeks. But your bait fish should really be moving off the main river channel, off the main lake channel into these pockets. So I'm going to key in on pockets in that middle section that do have a flat in the back of them that have some water coming in. So again, swans here, this area, I'm going to be looking at those flats in the back of it. You've got Indian Creek as you move on down the lake that has some huge flats on the left that those bass are going to push those shad up. Now, the other thing that's going on with these areas is the fact that you have algae starting to grow on these mud flats and stuff, and the bait fish is going to move up there to feed on that. So that's what's kind of drawing them there. Plus, you have some cold nights. So in the summertime, you know, we wanted that early morning bite because the water was at its coolest point, and then later on in the day, things got tougher. Well, it's reverse at this point because we've had some upper 30s, some low 40s, some cool nights. So now that water temperature is going to start to warm up, especially if you get some sunny afternoons. So things are going to get a little bit better in the afternoon. That's also going to cause that algae and stuff to grow, and it's going to pull that bait fish up there to feed. So that's why you're looking at these flats in the backs of these creeks to find those fish that are actively feeding. And I talked about that in the buzzbait video that I did the other day, was actively feeding fish. Okay, actively feeding fish. You don't want to sit around fish that are not active. You, even if you locate bait, you need to see fish that are actively feeding and things that are going on. So again, looking at these locations, looking in the backs of these creeks, the backs of these pockets here in the middle, and like I said, up in the river, that stuff might be right there on the main channel,
Yeah.
just off of it. Those mud flats are right there adjacent to it. Down the lake, as we move further and further down the lake, you're going to have to move further back in these creeks and these pockets to locate those mud flats. So again, I'm looking at those major creeks, moving on down to Muddy Creek, Flat Creek, McGuire Creek, all those creeks on down the way. You are looking for those flats in the back. Now, let's talk about the other thing. So we said upper end of the lake's going to cool off a lot faster. So you may see some of this fall feeding activity going on up there long before you ever see it going on towards the dam section of the lake. So if you're comfortable up there, you feel good fishing up there, get up there. Look for those fish that are further into that fall transition because they're going to be actively feeding. And if they're feeding up on shad, they're going to be good and fat and plump. But if you feel more comfortable down the lake, you start to look at the backs of these creeks, the backs of these pockets. But there's one other thing going on this time of year, that drawdown. So as that lake is starting to draw down, you're dealing with the situation of these areas. And I'll just take one, for instance, just up above Indian Creek here. We call it Cabin Holler just because we've stayed on the cabin there on the point before for a vacation. But moving into these areas, there's a lot of rock on those banks, even though they're basically 45s. Now you'll have some ledges and stuff like that, but even though they're 45s, there's a lot of rock there. You're still focusing on that 0 to 5 foot of the water column. And as that water's starting to come down, those crayfish and stuff have to reposition. They're up there under those rocks. They're going to start to move. So as they're moving, those bass are up there. They're going to be ready to try to capitalize on that, as well as trying to eat shad or bluegill. We saw a lot of bluegill out there that day we were down there. So with this section of the lake, or these two sections of the lake, you're focused a little bit on steeper walls. You're focused in on things that are going to be have some rock, still have some structure, some laydowns, trees, all of those things. You said something before we got on here, Kelsey. You said bait oriented baits.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, shad oriented baits. You're thinking about shad. The bass are thinking about shad. Now, yes, crayfish are still going to play in there at times, bluegill at times, but they're mainly shad oriented. So the colors, we're going to be talking about whites. We're going to talk about your Strike King, that sexy
Yeah, your
shad
chartreuses,
chartreuses.
your chartreuse black bag, things like that, depending on the water clarity that you're fishing in.
And that can be a big deal this time of year.
Yes.
I really thought that hurricane that came through was going to dump a lot more water on us and really muddy things up, but the water's been fairly clear. So you have to pay attention to what your conditions are. Threadfin don't like a lot of mud. Gizzards are good with it. Gizzards don't mind the dirty water, but threadfin are going to kind of run away from it a little bit if they can get away from it. So if you have a heavy rain this time of year, which is possible, and since they're pulling so much to the system, that mud's going to move around a lot.
That, and then you got wind to factor in this time of year as well, which is going to beat the banks up, get it muddy, things like that.
So look for those mud lines. That shad, those shad might pull back further out of those creeks if a good rain comes and you've got a lot of mud coming into the area. But keep those things in mind. Again, temperature, the length of day right now is impacting all this. These fish are getting into that mood to start moving because the days are getting shorter. So temperature, the length of day, the clarity of the water, all those things are going to play. I'm still going to focus as shallow as I can, though, just for my confidence wise, and because I feel like that's probably your highest percentage right now. There's tons of fish out there. We talked about pelagics at our last meeting and how those pelagic fish are roaming everywhere. And that can be a pain in the butt because if you get out there and try to start chasing those, sure, if you get them to fire up,
they're going to be good.
They're going to be good ones. You can capitalize on it. Had the situation happen at Boone Lake in our last tournament. But the thing is, I feel like those fish are so much harder to pin down. Those fish are so much harder to be consistent with.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to take my time and I'm going to put my focus into that 0 to 10, 0 to 5 foot area. I'm going to have a buzzbait on. I'm going to have a walking top water on. Going to have a square bill or a crankbait that runs a little bit deeper, something like a rock crawler in that, I forget exactly what the number is on it, but it runs 4 to 8 feet instead of the deeper diving one. I'm going to have a spinner bait on or a chatterbait. Those are all baits that are going to allow me to cover a lot of water. And by covering a lot of water, I'm going to locate those actively feeding fish. So high percentage in the fall transition. That's what you're looking for, guys. This isn't the summertime where we're camping out on a spot. We're looking for one specific location, or we're looking for one specific bay in the spring where we got a lot of spawners, we got a lot of fish.
You're gonna have to move.
You're gonna have to cover a lot of water. So that is the big key to the fall transition. Pay attention to those water temperatures. Again, upper end of the lake, it's going to cool off faster, so you might be able to get some of that fall feeding action up there earlier in the year, and then working your way downwards. Looking for those mud flats just off of the river channel there, up in the river. As you come down, you're going to have to start looking towards the backs of pockets, the backs of creeks that also have flats in them. Again, water temperatures, we're talking low 70s, getting down into the 60s here is this kind of time frame. The bass are going to be shad oriented, but on our drawdown lakes, remember there's crawfish having to reposition as they go through this whole year or through this transition as the water's falling. There's also bluegill up there. So the forage is really trying to push shallow, and that's where your most consistent fish are going to be. So go out there with your strengths. Don't be afraid to flip. Don't be afraid to pitch. If you come to these laydowns, you come to these docks, you've got confidence in that. Slow down, work them well, but keep moving, looking for those actively feeding areas, guys. The fall transition can be frustrating because one day it can be killer, and then the next day it can be brutally tough because they've moved on you. You've got to relocate them. But the key here, guys, is to make sure that you're moving. Make sure that you're moving. Again, that's my strength. That's what I like to do. So I kind of lean towards that heavy no matter what. But again, with the fall transition, key baits, buzzbait, a walking topwater style, a spinnerbait, a chatterbait, a square bill crankbait, or shallow running DT series, or like I said, that rock crawler in that 4 to 8 foot. But that's going to help you catch fish. You're going to catch a lot of fish as they're moving up shallow this time of the year. But just remember that in your mind. Keep key areas of the lake. If you're down lake and things aren't happening, get on up the river a little ways, head up to some shallower areas, and look for where those fish are feeding. But guys, we're going to get off here for this one. I hope y'all have enjoyed it. We'll catch you all on the next one.